discuss the state of this widening war on multiple fronts. Jasmine El-Gamal, former Middle East advisor for the Pentagon and the State Department, and Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good to have you both on. You know, it's a difficult question to ask because there is no clear answer. There may not be an answer, but Jasmine, perhaps I could begin with you. Is there a response by Israel to this strike that would be proportional? Again, a word that could be, you know, it's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Proportional to one side may not be proportional to the other, but a strike that Israel can carry out that would accomplish its goals of reestablishing deterrence, but without sparking a broader war.
Good to see you again, Jim. I mean, that's the question really that everyone is trying to figure out right now, including the Israelis, who are trying to figure out how best to strike and retaliate against Iran, with the Americans in their ear telling them that they support a retaliatory strike, but one that is proportional. They don't want this to blow completely out of proportion, as it has been spiraling over the last few months. And so we've heard that President Joe Biden and his team are not in favor of an Israeli strike against Iranian nuclear facilities. That said, even if the Israelis do listen to them, there are a variety of other targets that they can strike. There are military installations. There are Iranian assets and proxies outside of Iran, for example, in Syria and Iraq. We saw back in April when there was this exchange of fire between Iran and Israel that Israel has proven time and time again that its intelligence capabilities are extremely advanced, and that one of the messages that it wants to convey right now is that it can strike Iran and its proxies anywhere. So that could be an option, although you are hearing some more hawkish voices inside of Israel and even in the United States, like Senator Lindsey Graham, calling for that attack on the nuclear facilities.
Yeah, Naftali Bennett, former prime minister and possible candidate for prime minister down the line, he openly called for attacks on nuclear facilities. Behnam, I wonder, because if we look just at recent history of the last several weeks and months, at each opportunity, Israel, perhaps with some confidence, has carried out quite ambitious attacks. You think of the attack killing Nasrallah, the pager attack, now a ground operation underway inside southern Lebanon, the first time Israel has sent troops in numbers into Lebanon in 18 years. So I wonder, given that footing, should we brace ourselves for quite a large retaliation in the coming days?
It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's an excellent question because all trend lines, all signs certainly point to yes. And I think the most important variable or vector here is not the target, whether that's the nuclear issue or not, or a facility, or going after a certain person, or trying to defang the regime by going after a certain asset or military capability. It really is the publicity. If the Israelis take credit for their retaliatory operation, if you remember back on April 19th when they responded several days after the April 13, April 14 Iranian missile and drone barrage, they did not take credit for that. And reportedly, the Israelis chose the lowest of the low of the menu of options that they were presented with, and one that they were quite confident would not spur another Iranian kinetic reprisal. Here, based on the way things have been going in the past 3 weeks of the Middle East, which have really been 3 game-changing weeks that have done away with almost 3 decades of Iran's investment in that crown jewel, Lebanese Hezbollah, which is also the forefront of the regime's conventional deterrence against Israel and a way to guard its own nuclear program. Anything, honestly, is on the table. So I think the most important variable is the publicity. Then the secondary and tertiary is the scale and the scope. But make no mistake, Israel knows it has escalation dominance. And as we see in the past 3 weeks, it's acting like it has escalation dominance.
Yeah. Jasmine, Biden has said quite publicly now he does not support an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear sites. As we noted, Netanyahu has often not listened to or cooperated with the Biden administration. But let me ask you this, whether he wants to or not, Prime Minister Netanyahu, does he need U.S. military support to carry out a decisive attack or even an attack that does some lasting damage on Iran's nuclear facilities, or could Israel do it on its own?
I mean, Jim, the short answer is that the Israelis absolutely need the Americans, not just in terms of support, but in terms of defense as well. You have U.S. military assets, as you know, in the region, standing by in the case they need to defend Israel in case of a larger Iranian attack. I mean, this is not something that the Israelis could do alone. And Iran knows that, but Iran knows also that the Americans would come to the defense of Israel, which is why Iran has so far been reluctant to get fully engaged in that all-out conflict we've been talking about. Now, that said, you're absolutely right. What we've seen over the last year is that despite that Israeli need for American support, Prime Minister Netanyahu has more often than not ignored Biden's warnings and advice. When we saw the U.S. Ambassador to the UN today speaking about U.S. support for Israel and the language that she was using when she said the U.S. is fully in support of Israel, it reminded me of that bear hug language that was being used by Biden right after October 7th, that extremely enveloping, a supportive language that is meant to assure Israel publicly so that the U.S. can guide it privately. We haven't seen that bear hug approach be very successful when it came to Gaza and negotiations over a ceasefire. Whether or not it will be successful in this case remains to be seen.
Behnam, before we go, there is a well of support in this country. You hear it in some public comments from Israeli officials for the argument, now is the time, right? Now is the time to take out Iran's nuclear weapons. Now is the time even to pursue regime change in Iran. Now, I don't have to remind you, but or viewers of attempts to carry out regime change in this region and what followed. Is that a realistic objective for Israel at this point?
It's an objective that Israel seems to be going towards. But I would push away from the table on this and say we cannot divorce the arsonist, the Islamic Republic of Iran, from the whole host of fires it's caused in the region. And the irony of this is, if there ever was a place where a regime change option, not a la Iraq 2003 and not at all a la Afghanistan 2001, but on an entirely different model, could be employed in a way that actually aligns ways, means, and ends in the Middle East that we have not done, and actually in a way that allows you to marry your head or your strategy or with your heart and your values in the Middle East, it actually is indeed withstanding with the Iranian people. So while all attention is on the military issue and will Israel go after the nuclear program, yes or no, and the level of American permissibility for that, I would rewind, I think, back by 2 days and look at Benjamin Netanyahu's comments about standing with the Iranian people and about understanding the shared historical heritage and history between these two people and how the past 45 years really is an aberration and an insult to that history. And perhaps there is a better place for Israel and America to work together to stand united and affect a better strategy and employ similar values.
Well, listen, the region awaits the next steps, as do the people caught in the middle. Jasmine El-Gamal, Behnam Ben Taleblu, thanks so much to both of you.